He had already buried his expectations before she ever reached the cabin. By the time the wagon stopped in the snow, Elias Boone had prepared himself for a marriage without warmth, without laughter, without love. The mountains rose behind his cabin like ancient witnesses, their peaks sharp and white against a pale winter sky. Elias stood on the porch with his arms crossed, boots planted wide, breath fogging the air. He had lived alone in these mountains for 12 years, long enough to forget the sound of another person breathing nearby, long enough to believe solitude was not only safer, but necessary. The arrangement had been practical, brutally so. A man needed a wife to keep a homestead running, especially one as isolated as his. A woman needed shelter, food, and protection. Love was a luxury neither of them could afford. That was what Elias told himself as he watched the wagon approach, its wheels creaking under the weight of supplies and inevitability. He did not step forward when it stopped. The driver climbed down first, slapping his hands together against the cold. Then the woman emerged. She held a small brown suitcase in one hand, the other gripping her cloak tightly as the mountain wind tugged at it. She was not young in the way Elias had expected, not fragile either. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes were steady, observant, too steady for someone arriving to marry a stranger. She looked at him without flinching. Elias felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. "This is it," the driver said, gesturing to the cabin. "End of the road." The woman nodded once and stepped down carefully, boots crunching in the snow. She thanked the driver, paid him, and waited until the wagon disappeared down the narrow mountain path before turning fully toward Elias. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You must be Elias Boone," she said finally, her voice calm but not timid. He nodded, "Your Honor." "Yes." That was all. No smile, no tears, no hesitation. Good, Elias thought grimly. This will be easier if she doesn't expect more. He took her suitcase without asking and turned toward the cabin. "It's cold. Come inside." The cabin was simple, one main room with a stone hearth, a small kitchen space, and a ladder leading to a loft. The fire was already burning, and Anna paused just inside the door, taking it all in. Her eyes lingered on the worn furniture, the neatness of the place, the small signs of care Elias had never considered worth noticing. "You built this yourself?" she asked. "Yes. It's sturdy." He shrugged. Praise made him uncomfortable. They sat at opposite ends of the table while he served stew from a pot hanging over the fire. The silence was heavy but not awkward, at least not to Elias. He was used to quiet. He assumed she would be too, soon enough. But Anna watched him as they ate. Not rudely, not intensely. Just attentively. "You don't have to watch me," he said gruffly. "I know," she replied. "I'm learning." "Learning what?" "What kind of man I married." The word married landed harder than he expected. "We'll make this work," Elias said, voice flat. "You'll have your space. I won't bother you more than necessary." Anna set her spoon down slowly. "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter." She studied him, head tilted slightly. "It always matters, even when you pretend it doesn't." Something about the way she said it, without accusation, without pity, unsettled him. That night she took the bed while Elias slept near the fire. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself distance was kinder. Days passed. Snow fell steadily, trapping them in the cabin and in each other's presence. Anna rose early, cooked without complaint, learned the rhythms of the place quickly. She didn't ask for help, but she didn't refuse it either. She didn't pry into his past, didn't push for closeness he wasn't ready to give. But she spoke. She hummed while working, asked small questions about the land, read by the fire in the evenings, her brow furrowed in concentration. She brought warmth into the cabin that had nothing to do with the hearth. Elias found himself listening for her footsteps. One evening, after a long day chopping wood, he came inside to find Anna standing by the window, staring out at the mountains. Tears streaked her cheeks silently. His chest tightened. "What's wrong?" he asked before he could stop himself. She wiped her face quickly. "Nothing." "That's a lie." She hesitated, then sighed. "I thought I was prepared," she said softly, "for loneliness, for hardship. I've had both before, but this place, it's beautiful in a way that hurts." He frowned. "Hurts?" "It reminds me of everything I've lost," she said, "and everything I might never have." Elias didn't know how to answer that. He only knew that seeing her cry stirred something sharp and protective inside him. "I won't hurt you," he said suddenly. She looked at him then, eyes red but clear. "I know." The certainty in her voice shook him more than doubt would have. Winter deepened. Supplies ran low. One night, Elias slipped on ice while hauling water and twisted his ankle badly. He tried to hide it, but Anna noticed immediately. "Sit," she ordered, more firm than he'd ever heard her. "I can manage." "You can't," she said, kneeling to unwrap his boot. "And you don't have to." She tended his injury with steady hands, her touch gentle but confident. Elias watched her, heart pounding, realizing how long it had been since anyone cared whether he was hurt. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "Yes," she said quietly, "I do." As the days passed and he healed, roles shifted. Anna took on more of the physical work than Elias liked, and he found himself watching her with something dangerously close to admiration. One night during a heavy snowfall, the wind howled so fiercely the cabin walls groaned. The fire burned low, and Anna sat close to Elias for warmth, their shoulders touching. Neither moved away. "You expected this to be loveless," she said suddenly. "Yes." "Why?" He stared into the fire. "Because love makes things break worse when they fall apart." She was silent for a long moment. "Love can also make things stronger than they would be alone," she said. He scoffed softly. "You sound like you still believe that." "I do." He turned to her then, really looked at her, at the resolve in her face, at the kindness she never withheld, even when he kept her at arm's length. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I don't know how to be that man." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. "Then learn," she said, "with me." The kiss came hesitantly, almost shy. Elias expected fear. Instead, he felt something loosen inside him, like ice cracking after a long winter. From that night on, nothing was the same. Spring came late but determined. Snow melted into rushing streams. The mountains softened, greens pushing through the white. Elias built onto the cabin that summer, adding windows, light space. Anna filled it with life. They laughed more, talked late into the night, fought sometimes, but always came back to each other. Elias learned that love wasn't a storm that destroyed, it was a fire that had to be tended. One evening, as they stood outside watching the sun dip behind the peaks, Anna leaned into him. "You still think this was meant to be loveless?" she asked. Elias smiled, slow and genuine. "No," he said, "I think it was meant to teach me how wrong I was." The mountain stood silent around them, holding their story the way it held all things, patiently, powerfully, forever changed. The first time Elias realized fear had returned to his life, it wasn't the sharp, wild fear of storms or wolves or winter starvation. It was the quiet fear of losing something he had finally allowed himself to love. Spring had fully settled into the mountains, and with it came a sense of renewal Elias had never known. The land breathed again, streams swelled, birds returned, and the air carried the promise of growth instead of survival. Anna moved through the cabin with a lightness that still surprised him. She sang now, openly, her voice filling the spaces that loneliness once owned. Yet peace, Elias had learned, was never permanent. It came in the form of a letter. Anna stood at the table one morning, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Elias noticed the color drain from her face before she spoke. "It's from my sister," she said. Elias stilled. Anna had rarely spoken of her family, only fragments, poverty, obligation, choices made too young. "What does it say?" he asked carefully. "She's ill, very ill," Anna swallowed, "and alone." Silence pressed down between them. "You want to go to her?" Elias said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," her eyes lifted to his, full of apology. "I have to." The word have sliced through him. He nodded once because he loved her enough not to cage her with his fear. "When?" he asked. "Soon, before the pass is close again." That night Elias lay awake listening to Anna's breathing beside him. He had grown used to this warmth, shared space, the comfort of knowing he was not alone. The thought of returning to silence felt unbearable. He did not tell her that. Instead, he helped her prepare. They packed supplies together. He repaired her boots. He showed her the safest paths through the lower valleys. Each task felt like both care and surrender. The morning she left, the mountain seemed to lean in, as if listening. "I'll come back," Anna said, gripping his coat. "I promise." Elias cupped her face in his hands, resting his forehead against hers. "I'll be here." The words felt fragile. Hope often was. Days stretched into weeks. Elias returned to old habits, work until exhaustion, eat mechanically, sleep restlessly. But solitude no longer fit him the way it once had. Every corner of the cabin carried Anna's presence. Her shawl hung by the door. Her book lay open near the hearth. Her laughter echoed where silence once ruled. He counted days by the sun and fear by the ache in his chest. Then one evening, as dusk bled into night, Elias heard footsteps. He was outside splitting wood when he saw her, walking slowly up the path, thinner, wearier but unmistakably Anna. He dropped the axe and crossed the distance in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms so tightly she gasped. "You came back," he breathed. She laughed softly against his chest. "Of course I did." Inside the cabin, by firelight, she told him everything. Her sister had survived but would need ongoing care. Anna had arranged help, made peace with old wounds, closed a chapter she never thought she'd finish. "I realized something," she said quietly. "I wasn't running anymore, I was choosing." Elias took her hand. "And you chose this." She smiled. "I chose us." Summer passed with steady joy. Elias taught Anna to ride. She taught him to read aloud, his voice stumbling but determined. They built a small garden. They argued about fence lines and laughed about it later. Love became less of a revelation and more of a daily practice. Then one afternoon, a stranger arrived. He rode up on a fine horse, coat dusted with travel, posture confident in a way Elias did not trust. Anna watched from the porch, tension creeping into her shoulders. "I know him," she whispered. The man dismounted and smiled thinly. "Anna, you disappeared." "What do you want?" she asked. "To remind you of your obligations," he replied smoothly. "Your marriage was informal. There are people who would contest it." Elias stepped forward, placing himself between them. "She's my wife." The man looked him over with faint amusement. "On paper." Anna's hand tightened on Elias' arm. "I won't leave," she said firmly. "I won't be taken." The confrontation stretched until the stranger finally left, but the damage lingered. That night, Anna trembled in her sleep. "They could come back," she murmured. Elias stared into the darkness. "Then they'll find we're not easy to move." He spent the next week strengthening more than the homestead. He spoke to distant authorities, secured documents, learned the laws he once ignored. For the first time in his life, Elias fought not just for survival, but for permanence. Autumn arrived golden and forgiving. One evening, as leaves fell around them, Elias stopped Anna by the creek. "I never thought I deserved this," he said, "but I won't let it be taken." She touched his face, eyes shining. "Neither will I." Winter returned, but it no longer frightened him. The cabin stood stronger, so did they. On the coldest night of the year, Anna placed his hand over her stomach and whispered, "We won't be alone again." Elias felt tears freeze on his lashes as the mountain stood witness once more, not to isolation, but to a love that had survived fear, distance, and the hardest truth of all, that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is let himself be changed.